There we go. I'm going to hit this recording, and John, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Do I have to read this whole thing and make sure I'm okay with it? All right. So as Shane mentioned, my name is John Kapler. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm the really tall guy that wanders around when there isn't COVID going on. I've been around for roughly 12 years, scarily, which is always fun, but I'm kind of the workflow guy. If I haven't worked with you before, I'm sure I will work with you in the future whenever it comes to figuring out workflow or doing anything within workflow. But today, we're going to talk a little bit about queue management, and we're going to talk about kind of how we created it and made it kind of what we needed it to be for EVA Next, because in current EVA, and honestly, even within iValua, there wasn't a base piece of functionality that worked like it. So we kind of had to make up our own fun new queue management setup. So it gives us a nice bit of configurability and some fun new features, and obviously plenty of tweaks along the way. Some of those, and Shane, this is just kind of a heads up as well. A lot of this went in on 8/31. Even in setting up this this demo, I found that we broke some stuff since then. So there is a ticket going into system test that I can share with you guys after this, but I can show you what is in system test now and talk through any of the minor things that will be fixed along the way. But I'm going to take you from kind of the very, very beginning of how you set up as a queue management organization, where that works in the workflow, how you set up the users to be the managers of those queues or the buyers for those queues, and then kind of take you through the process of actually taking a requisition, grabbing it, assigning it to a buyer to be worked, them reviewing and approving, and kind of getting out the door. So let me go ahead and hide this. I know we are recording, so I'll try to kind of take breaks at logical stops for questions. But if you guys do have any questions, and I'll kind of put either Shane or Kelly on the spot here, if you guys don't mind just kind of fielding those questions and just hollering at me if there's a big deal that I need to stop for.
That'll be great. Thanks,
helpful.
John.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to start at the very kind of beginning of this setup. So what we did was at the site level, which is the current BiSense.org level, we have the ability to turn on what is called Queue Manager as just a yes, no, this requires Queue Manager. Really what this does is it forces any requisition that's created within, and in this case, this is system test, so I made a queue management site. Any requisition created within this site is forced to go through queue management. So you can take this and kind of extrapolate it out. But the idea being, if you create a requisition in here, it has to go through queue management, where the manager and the buyers also have purview over your individual site. So the idea would be, for instance, with a group like VSP that has queue management set up, they can come in and they can see their individual queue items, and they won't see VCCS, they won't see JMU, they won't see anyone else. It's all kind of tied to that organizational perimeter, and then at a basic level, an approval profile. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to kind of the user setup for this. So once we've set up our site, some of you may be familiar with our workflow, which I promised wouldn't be big, but still somehow has gotten big enough that I have to scroll. We have this area in the workflow right here called Queue Manager. At a very simple level, all this decision diamond is doing is asking, for your requisition, are you creating it for a site where the answer to this question is yes? So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. If your site is set up for queue management, it will come to this buyer manager bucket. If it is not, it will continue on to integration is the area above that. Assuming there is no integration, no PO print, nothing like that, it will just go straight to ordered once this is done. So this is kind of the little area that we made. The reason why we decided to do it kind of off to the side, and it really wasn't an option to be able to do within the approval rules area, was the selectable performer, which is the functionality we're using and utilizing within Ivalua, didn't have the flexibility to work within our little EVA approvals section. Additionally, it gives us more flexibility because we don't want any editing to be done in these nodes. However, when it comes to the buyer team, they are going to generally be procurement professionals who are creating and picking the correct item to be able to edit the requisition in this node only, to be able to make those updates and send it out the door. So the power behind that is really nowhere else can someone kind of have edit approvable as we know it today, at least at this point before go live. But this area called buyer team. So it's definitely something to know moving forward, and I'll kind of get to that when we get into the demo portion of this. But I just kind of wanted to talk through a little bit of how that process was set up. So now we're going to head over to kind of the basic user setup. So you can see here I have two users. I have a queue manager and a buyer queue. If I come into these users, very simply, this is just an employee with sealed sourcing, generic name. Their org perimeter is going to be the sites that they have the ability to manage. So in this particular case, and I wanted to make sure it was very cleaned up for demo purposes and testing purposes, they only have access to this queue management site. And lastly, within their user preferences, they have an approval profile called Buyer Manager, which can be picked up right here.
Hey, John, a question came in when you offered the org parameter from Bree.
Sure. What was it?
Does the buyer manager and the buyer have to be in the site the rec came from?
Yes.
Or to be clear, they have to have access to that site, right, John?
Correct. Yeah.
There you go.
But it doesn't have to be their home organization.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So like VCCS will have kind of purview or the organizational perimeter over the ones that are coming into their queue, but their main organization will be, what is it, A261 or A270, whichever one the shared service one is. And that would be where their procurements come out of.
Thank you.
Sure. So again, just at a very simple level, all you need to be a queue manager is organizational perimeter, and under user preferences, you need to have buyer manager as your approval profile. The next piece of that is the site that you belong to, or sites, if there are multiple, need to be set up for queue manager, which is set up in this site table. And this needs to be set to yes, so that in the workflow, it's coming to this buyer manager node. So that's kind of the full circle of kind of how everything works together. Additionally, for buyers, it will look very similar. Again, this is an employee with sealed sourcing. Everything looks very similar, pretty much identical, except for when we get to the user preferences. Let's see, queue management is picked. For anyone in the buyer team, they need to be assigned the approval profile buyer. extremely generic. I know we have a lot of buyer 1, 2, 3, inbox, all of those. Really, it's just buyer moving forward for anybody within or using queues. What this allows us to do when the buyer manager at this point is looking at a requisition and they're looking to assign it to a buyer team member right here, we look at anyone who has buyer as the approval profile within that organizational perimeter. So it should be a fairly succinct, simple way of kind of keeping all of these together as we go. And from a basic setup standpoint, that's really it. There's not a lot more. Obviously, most of these buyers and these buyer team members are not going to be just one approver. They may have many other approval profiles, but in terms of queue management specifically, this is the very simple basic setup for what needs to be done for everything to work. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to hop in as the queue manager first. You can see here, I come on my home page. We have a few new widgets. PRs to be assigned, PRs assigned to me, assignments in progress. This same menu can actually also be found within queue management underneath the procurement dropdown. So PRs to be assigned, assignments in progress, and PRs assigned to me. They should be fairly generically named. Something that needs to be assigned is going to be in this bucket. Anything that's assigned to me to be worked is going to be in this bucket. And this assignments in progress is a newer piece that we've added into queue management. What this allows us to do, and what allows your users to do as well, is to have a queue that's in progress that I haven't yet assigned out. So let's say I've looked at a few recs and I've decided, okay, I know what recs need to be assigned. Oh, I got to take a phone call, or, oh, I'm really hungry, or any of those kind of reasons, right? Where you need to just take a step away. Instead of having to start all over again, picking all your recs, you can just click save and it will actually appear in this assignments in progress so they can come right back to the work that they were doing and continue to assign if they need to, or potentially even cancel and send the rec back into the queue. But first, I kind of want to take you guys through the PRs to be assigned page and talk a little bit about how this works to be a multi-organization process. So what we have here is a list, and you can see I was very specific in my naming with John Q multiple times and copy of copy of copy. But really, this is any requisition that I have purview to assign. And what I mean by purview is if I have multiple organizations, which most people won't, that's not really something we need to worry about. I know VCCS will assign to all of a shared service team, but that's all kind of within one realm. But they'll have multiple entities that are submitting these requisitions. So like you would see Northern Virginia Community College or Tidewater Community College would show up in this entity. You can use the sort functionality. You can look at different sites. You can jump right into a rec if you'd like, just to take a quick look at it to make sure you have an idea for what it is before you decide to assign it. But the idea here is we have the ability to click this button, which is only visible if you have a queue manager approval profile or if you're a super admin user, which really shouldn't matter. But you come in here and you more or less confirm that you want to assign these requisitions to someone to work. So we'll go ahead and confirm. And you come into this queue process page. Now, I'm probably going to give you guys a little more information than you need because this is being recorded. It's probably good just to have out there so you guys know and can get back to it. But really, what the queue is its own little transaction, if you will. So similar to how a requisition is a transaction, has its own workflow, sourcing has its own workflow. This really has its own little baby workflow to be able to handle this assignment in a mass way. We have the ability to go in to any requisition and we can individually assign these out. We can go to this main buyer dropdown, and let's say I want to assign everything to Jason. If I click on this, and this is one piece that I actually have a note, we're going to add a little I next to this to explain that you need to click save, because I don't know that it's necessarily that easy to follow. But once you do it once, it should be hopefully fairly easy. You have the ability to kind of mass assign, and this will work for 20 recs, 1 rec. You can go back in later and say, oh, I meant to assign this to Govind or to John. And you can kind of move these things around as much as you need to. So it really adds a lot of kind of quick hitting flexibility to assign these buyers to really get this process moving in a way that we couldn't do before. On the right-hand side, we have this workflow grid. It's a very simple grid. We didn't add a lot to it. The idea behind it is anytime a user who is in our buyer list, so anyone that appears in this list right here, we look at anyone who's in the node buyer team, and we just take account of it. So Jason has one thing assigned to him. Q buyer has one thing assigned to him. John, DGS approver, has 3 things assigned to them. And you can kind of get the idea that eventually this kind of becomes a workload balance type grid. Again, it's very simple. It's not anything crazy in how we're grabbing this information. The idea is if, it's me, Shane, and Kelly on a team, and Shane has 20 things, Kelly has 10, and I have 1, now you can look at that and say, oh, well, John needs more. Let me go ahead and give John more work. If that is how that logic for the queue manager is done. In some cases, they look at a rec and they say, oh, this is coming from Northern Virginia Community College. Somebody specific works on that, right? So that's just gonna, the workload grid may not be very helpful for them. But at the end of the day, it gives you a very quick glimpse into how busy are the people who are being assigned the work, which is, I think, no matter what, at least a little bit helpful to know that, hey, why are there 50 things assigned and they haven't moved in 4 days? That kind of information is something that really doesn't exist today. That I think is a great addition. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here, I'm going to add my buyer queue member just to this rec. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. As I mentioned, let's say I started going through it. I needed to save. Oh no, I needed to step away. Now I can come back in, come right back to where I was and change things if I need to. Cancel. This is a piece that I found currently is not working, unfortunately. But the idea behind the cancel button is that it will return it back into the queue to be assigned later. It's kind of a cancel out button. There was a callback missing when we did a migration, and it just didn't get caught. So we have to remigrate that. But in theory, what this will do is it will send all of these requisitions back into the PRs to be assigned, which again kind of makes sense with that queue process. For today's demo, we're going to go ahead and just confirm this. And you can see there were a few things that actually changed along the way. We had one more go to queue buyer, one more go to Jason, and one more go to John, DGS approver. And if I go back to my PRs to be assigned, you can see my list has gotten shorter. I don't have more recs to approve, to assign out as the manager. If I'm coming into my home page my PRs to be assigned is less, and I don't have any assigned to me because in this case, I'm the manager and I'm not on the buyer team. I didn't assign any to myself to work. So that's kind of the view of the world from the buyer manager side of the house. So what I'm going to do now is log in as the buyer team member. And you'll see a very similar looking homepage, except now I have PRs to be assigned to me. I do want to talk about one piece, and this is kind of a transparency. As a member of the queue, as the team member of the queue, I have the ability to look at what is out there to be assigned. But you can see here, I do not have the ability to assign any of these requisitions. That is only for the buyer manager to be able to take action on and move forward. The idea here is, let's say you're looking through or you know a particular requisition is coming your way. You can kind of keep an eye and say, oh, yeah, this one right here, go ahead and assign that one to me and notify whoever it is, and that can be done that way. But really, it's kind of in the effort of being transparent, really. So you can see here, I have a couple requisitions. I do want to actually come back to here briefly. So my to-do list, because this is really at the end of the day an approval as the buyer team member, you can access this from your my to-do list. You'll get a notification that says, hey, this was assigned to you. And you can come in and really just treat the requisition as a normal approval, except as I mentioned, this is the only approval in our entire system currently that allows you to edit the requisition within the approval flow. So within here, you can see all of these fields are editable. If this user wants to go create a solicitation to be able to go source this item, they have the flexibility to do that. If at any point they, as the professional buyer, know that there are approvals that need to be done, they'll update everything, reject, and then ask the end users to resubmit it, just to make sure.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
Based off of what you just said, so then that means that the buyer inbox, anyone who has buyer inbox today, which allows them to go in and touch a requisition, they actually really need to be switched over to Queue Manager based off of what you just said. Queue Manager is going to be the only thing that's going to allow you to manipulate or update the requisition other than the accounting field, correct? Did I hear that right?
At this point, yes. Everything else in the every other step in the workflow is locked down. It needs to be withdrawn or denied before the user can make the updates to the requisition.
Okay, so the buyer inbox is still only updating accounting codes, right?
When you say buyer inbox, you mean this buyer team?
Because no. The role buyer inbox converted for those agencies that have buyer inbox converted in the workflow. Converted in the workflow, but they can't go in and update any requisition.
Nope, not within here, no.
Okay.
And John, while we're asking questions, I got another one for you.
Sure.
And this does happen. I know this is a scenario. Tony brought this up in the chat. If I'm a buyer manager, but I also work requisitions, in order to assign a requisition to myself, I would need to give not only the buyer manager role, but also the buyer profile as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And then you'll show up in the drop-down list.
Great. And that's a legitimate scenario that sometimes the manager actually will assign to themselves to work things. So
Absolutely.
great.
So, John, since we're all chiming in, so you indicated that as the buyer assigned to make the decision tree of either approving it and out the door, forwarding it on to sourcing, or making changes and rejecting it was a word I heard to send it back through the EVA approval flows. So if I'm correct, even though I can go in and make changes, in order for the workflow to refire, they have to be trained to make the changes and reject it, and it will hold the changes we made, but send it back through the workflow?
At this point, yes.
Okay. And if I send it on to sourcing, are they notified that it goes to sourcing and not to an order?
So it's not really sending, it's just while it's waiting in this step in the workflow, you're really doing a sourcing activity completely separate of it. And then having the ability, once you've finished that sourcing activity, there'll be a button up here that says update prices, I believe. And what that will do is then update your requisition with the prices from the solicitation. So you're really just waiting in this step. It doesn't leave here until you either click approve or reject. Does that answer your question?
And that's the only way for a buyer to do a sourcing event off a requisition.
Correct.
So it really sounds like seeing Q Manager for the first time, and I'm going to make a very broad statement here. It sounds like the buyer role and the buyer inbox that's now been converted into the EVA workflow, we really need to be driving all of our professional buyers to turn on Q Manager. That's just an initial reaction.
Agree.
Can I just clarify one thing real quick?
Mhm.
And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I did go back into test real quick just to make sure. If you need the workflow to refire and you need your end user to correct or make a change to something, you have to ask them to withdraw it and then resubmit. The reject is a firm reject, like there's no coming back. I just tested it, so I think I'm right, but I just want to make sure that we're clear on withdraw versus reject. And I know that's not directly related, but I want to make sure the terminology doesn't confuse people in the long run.
So when we reject, it goes into that rejected status, right? I think that was a change that Mark did recently.
Correct. It's in a request rejected status.
And then can they take that and click withdraw?
I don't see a button as an admin to do that.
So we set it up that only the requisitioner or the person who created the rec has the withdraw option.
Okay.
So it may be that. But at some point, it shouldn't. I don't think the rec just dies, or at least I don't think it should just die, right? It should go back for them to be able to work it and potentially resubmit it. So that might just be something we have to take a look at after this meeting.
I'm testing it.
Someone else have a question? I've taken a note. We can talk about that one a little bit later. Any other questions before I kind of get back into the overview of it?
Yeah, I'll hit one more while we're doing questions. And this is more a statement, and John, you can say yes or no. In order to turn a site on, in your setup, when you're flipping a site from no to yes, CGI at this point is still handling that for us. And we would need to put in a request through Jira to CGI to turn on a site for Queue Manager, correct?
Yes.
Great.
But then you guys have the full ability to then assign out who the manager is.
Oh, absolutely. It's just the site itself, that yes, no checkbox. That's a site setup that you guys can do.
Correct. Any other questions?
There's a question in the chat, Shane.
There's a couple questions. One from Tony. Can the buyer make changes and then just approve if they do not want to refire workflow?
Yes.
Okay, so that is true. So, some of if you're just making a switch and you don't need to send it back through because you can just make the changes and approve it and it'll keep moving forward. Kimberly's asking about what type of Jira ticket and what information is needed. I don't know that we'll get an answer for you on that. I assume it'll be a request similar to what we do now. What we need, where we're going to, ask for a data change or an update, but we'll figure that out and get that straight with John and let everybody know. And then Ethel's asking about needing to see the top of the flow chart.
I saw that one. Is this answer? So it looks, and just to kind of clarify, this continues up this line afterwards. We can't, for some reason, get it to show that it comes back to here, but buyer team goes as the next step to this require integration if it's approved. Any other questions? So there's really not too much more to show. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just approve this. You can see I didn't have any additional integration, so it just went straight to an order. If I head back to my home page, my PRs assigned to me is one less because that was the one that I already approved. So if I want to start working on the next one, I can just kind of keep coming back to this page. The idea being for people that use Queue Manager, which I know right now really aren't too many, but it sounds like based on kind of what Sandra just mentioned and maybe what the thought might be moving forward is that more may use it. Is that really managers tend to live on their PRs to be assigned page, while the buyer team kind of just comes to this and they just start grabbing things as they come in. Kind of similar to what they do today within Ariba. It's just in a little different area, a little different way. We've added a few little nice to haves along the way with that workload overview. We're working on a way to return things. So in a situation where there's something assigned to me, to return it back to the queue. I believe we had it at one point and it's just not there anymore. So I'm doing some research on that to see. But the idea would be that a manager could grab something that's been assigned and put it back into the bucket. For the case that somebody's out, another option would be if someone's out just on vacation and they assigned their delegation to someone else, then they can work through the delegation functionality within the new system.
So, John, if I can ask one more question on approvals.
Sure.
We just modified the ability to do ad hoc approvers and indicate where those ad hoc approvers happen.
Mm-hmm.
Is that only in the EVA approval nodes, or could in Queue Manager, before I'm sending it out the door, could I ad hoc in an approver there?
Not at this point. It is only within the EVA approvals. This section, which is, for those of you who've seen it, can repeat as many times as there are rules. So ad hoc is done by the time you get to here. Any other questions?
I do have one more follow-up question, John. I'm sorry.
Sure.
So I know that we are going to go back and look at the workflow refire and things like that, but I'm going to speak for our team and what we are hearing. I know that some of the AEs want to show this to their clients, or we have some clients that are asking to see it. So what is our expectation if we want this turned on? Like, can we do that now? I don't know if this would go in train or UAT. I guess can we do this in train and let agencies look at it, or what is our thought process on working with the agencies now?
So from just a setup standpoint, like I said, we're still doing a little bit of cleanup. That's what this EVA D is right here. It's going into system test tomorrow. But the idea would be I think next Wednesday is the next UAT drop. So I would say that would be the best area to do it in. It'll get there the fastest. I think we also do train at the same time we do UAT. So it's really kind of up to you guys on how you want to do it.
That is correct. Training and UAT are updated at the same time.
Yeah. So whatever environment's easier, or what they have more, or they're more used to working with. But I would say, this is not at the end of the discussion for sure. We can, if you guys have individual groups that you're trying to work with or get something set up, we can open up tickets to track some of that work to make sure everything looks good and you guys don't have any questions, be able to track it for others. If you're the first group to go look at it and you find, ABC, and then somebody else comes and can see kind of how that process works.
And John, we had two questions from Tony and Elizabeth about, hey, my agency, my sites are already turned on.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just show everybody the site table again real quick where you can confirm and how you navigate to that? So you guys can check this yourself. Now, you can't make the edits. You can't flip it on and off. You have to work with CGI to turn a site on or off for queue management. But if you're wondering if you have an agency that has Queue Manager already turned on, because when CGI did the conversion, some of the sites came over converted as yes for Queue Manager because they are an existing production.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead, John, if you
Sure.
show everybody where the site table is.
So in this admin drop down, you come to browse data. If you click on that, it'll take you to this page. You can really just type the word site. But it's this T-org site table. I may have more options on this than you guys do because I have super admin access. But from here, you can search by keywords. So for instance, I know that there's two named Q, and you should be able to figure out which site you were looking at. You can see here this Queue Manager set to yes for both of those. So that would be the first step. Is anybody that you want to test, make sure that the sites that they're creating things for, requisitions for, have Queue Manager turned on to make sure that they get into the queue. And then once you've done that, you make sure that there's a manager set up to maintain and manage the queue, and buyers to be assigned to work the queue. And that's kind of the process.
I have a question.
Sure.
just to make sure you understand this, when we're dealing with queue manager, we have three types of individuals. First one being the queue manager, the queue buyer, and a requisitioner. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the ones that would be able to see the widgets and play around with assigning and making changes would be the queue manager and the queue buyer.
Correct.
So a requisitioner should not see those widgets because assigned to them, not assigned to them, it doesn't matter. Correct?
I believe it will just show as zeros.
But they will still see the widgets.
I believe so, and I can check that. So yeah, in the example that, your organization isn't set up at all for queue management, you would see those three widgets and just zeros in all of them.
Oh, okay.
And it wouldn't do anything. It would come right to this page because everybody can see this page. You just won't see any transactions if your organization doesn't have any requisitions. I'm in as an admin.
So talking about VCCS, I just want to wrap my head around this. A queue manager at VCCS will need to have access to all the sites to be able to get all the requisitions that need to come to the queue manager, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then the central buyers would have buyer, queue buyer, correct?
Just buyer.
Wrong. To be able for the queue manager to assign it to them.
Correct.
Okay. Can those queue buyers, do they need to have access to all the sites?
Yes.
Okay. If I limit the sites for a queue buyer, it would only queue manager could only assign requisitions that apply to that particular queue buyer.
Correct. They wouldn't be in the drop down for any rec.
Exactly. So I'm just trying to think outside the box here. If a queue manager wanted to manage requisition coming from different sites, meaning sites from the north, east, west, or whatever, and he has buyers assigned to those particular areas, all the configuration would have to do is limit what those queue buyers can see. So it would be easier for the queue manager to assign to those specific individuals, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So you would think too, and just from like a training perspective, if you're going to be doing things in bulk, you'd probably want to pick your wests here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then assign, so that way when you come to that page, you're assigning to the same group of people, right? But I have a note here to make sure that we have a stop on that, to make sure that people aren't able to assign outside of their queue, which I don't believe they can, but have a note here.
And the role of a queue manager is only one. There's only one role. You can assign to different people, I'm assuming, but there's only one queue manager role.
Yes. So if you're in different organizations, you're still the queue manager, but just for your different organizations.
Thanks.
Sure.
I have one more follow-up question. I'm sorry.
Sure.
So when I asked about getting the agencies access to this, I just want to, just so I'm clear, a JIRA ticket needs to be done and the PCR team will get, is there a takeaway that somebody's going to get us the process? If it's going in next Wednesday for those agencies that want to go ahead and play with it now, did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I can do that. I can get you guys just like a template. I think I have a note somewhere else to set a template. I already started doing it.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a little comment about all the training, queue manager, or whatever. I think it's awesome that you do a show and tell. I'm just a little concerned. I just throwing it out there for the whole conversation. For somebody who's not used to using queue manager. Yet going live November 1st, throwing that into the mix may or may not be an issue. I'm just throwing that question out there for discussion. We're gonna have to be now, probably later.
As of now, if they're not a queue management group, we'd have to change them to be queue manager. So there'd be that whole process where they would have to sign off, I believe, to say this is how I want to do business. Otherwise, it's just going to be an approval that's in that EVA approval section of the workflow, where they can review and approve, but they can't edit the requisition at that point. So I don't think, and Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we're saying we're just going to change people that have buyer inbox to now go to a queue manager, but we're going to offer it to them to say, hey, if you want to edit things, this is how you can do it.
Correct. We already have some agencies that want to see queue manager that have buyer inbox. And so I think there are some AEs that want to go ahead and meet with those agencies and show them that. And I guess just to clarify, buyer inbox, if the requisition needs to be updated, the path is we advise the requisitioner to withdraw, update, and put it back through. That is the only way that anything in the requisition can be changed, as opposed to if we send them to queue manager, then whoever's managing, working that requisition can change it. Is that correct? That's a true statement, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a workaround for both. It's just some agencies are already asking about queue manager.
So yeah, I don't think we're going to just change somebody's whole process day one and say, okay, have fun. I think they have to buy it.
I was just, again, we just threw it out there.
Oh yeah. No, you're good. Any other questions? And sorry, we're, I think, 5 minutes over, but hopefully this was helpful. Well, that's all I really had to go over in terms of kind of a demonstration of everything. Shane, did you have anything else?
No, that's, I wanted everybody to see this and start thinking about it. It is in UAT in certain areas. You can go to the site table and figure out who it's turned on for. So, absolutely appreciate the time, and I can see people's wheels are turning, on this one for sure. So good stuff.
So, Shane, and John, thank you very much. So, did John go away?
No, I'm here. Hello.
Oh, there you are.